Hello and welcome to another episode of Warm Blanket, the podcast where we embark on a journey to see what makes us feel good about Star Trek, where our love comes from, and what it means for us. In short, what is our warm blanket? My name is Gary and I'm your host, and I'm very honored to welcome here Dan from the YouTube channel Kertrats. In the past 4 years, he dived into multiple aspects of the Star Trek franchise, from books and lore through news and updates. His new podcast called Positively Trek captivates people from all ages, and it is available in many multiple podcasting platforms. Let's give a warm welcome to Dan. How are you today,
Oh,
sir?
I'm doing really well, and thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm honored to be here.
Now the honor is really mine, and I couldn't help notice. Obviously, the audience won't be able to see this, but you do have a blanket around yourself at the moment.
I do. It's where I live. The weather has been kind of gloomy and rainy and chilly today, and I do all my recording in the basement, so it's kind of cold down here.
So it's like I was secretly wishing, like you're gonna say that. I was just preparing because the podcast called Warm Blanket. I'm gonna have one too.
Yeah, it works out perfectly.
No, that's awesome. So, we know each other. Well, we haven't really hung around a lot, like in this fashion, but we know each other for a few years now. And I must say, I think it took me about 2 years to figure out what your channel called. Actually, what your channel name means. Like, how did you come up with the channel name?
It's actually funny. Like I think it comes from just playing video games back in the day and having to come up with some kind of handle for my little, like playing Counter-Strike or something like that, and
Mhm.
it was like, Kertrats, Star Trek backwards, that works, and it just kind of stuck, and I've used it ever since. So my Twitter handle's at Kertrats, and I was trying to think of, what should I call this new YouTube channel I'm starting? And I'm like, what the heck, Kertrats Productions. It's something that's stuck all this time, and it's kind of fun to see people's reactions when they kind of piece it together and figure out that, it's just Star Trek backwards.
It's crazy. Like it bugged me so many times because like with mine is kind of easy. TREKKERPRISE is like you put together Trekkie or Trekker and Enterprise and get TREKKERPRISE, or like with Cat Wolski, it needed a bit of a explanation as well, like what Cat Wolski means, and yours, like we had a few conversation I remember with Trek on the Tube that we had regarding just your channel. I'm like, I have no idea what Gertrude is, and I think two or three times we had this, and at one point, I think I texted you at one point on Twitter saying that I've just got it. I can't believe that it took me so long.
Yeah,
But
no, it's a fun one. It's not something I bring it up every once in a while on the channel. I'll kind of in a video mention that, and I think I had an interview with Garrett Wong, and I had him say it as kind of a bumper. So, it's here and there sprinkled out, but if you're not really closely watching every video, it's easy to miss for sure.
Did he ever figure it out, or Gareth Wong? Not to make him embarrassed or anything, but
No, I have to admit, I just actually told him. I was like, "Oh, could you say, you're watching Kertrats Productions? That's just Star Trek backwards." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm totally game for that." So,
wow. Okay, well, I would have seen his face, like realizing like what this Kertrats was, and it's like, oh, I see, clever. That would have been an interesting one. So, I guess we could start at the very beginning of this whole conversation and ask the age-old question to when, or rather how, did you get into Star Trek?
well, I've been a fan of Star Trek since way early days in my life, to the point where, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but there are a few things that definitely contributed to it. So I remember as a kid on Saturday mornings, kids always watch their Saturday morning cartoons. Here in Canada, our local CBC channel, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, they had Star Trek the original series playing. I think it was either at like 8 a.m. or 11 a.m., something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I would be watching cartoons, and then I'd switch over to Star Trek, or vice versa. I can't remember exactly, but there was definitely an hour every Saturday morning that, oh, I'm sorry, cartoons have to be put aside. I'm watching Star Trek now. And the other thing I really remember is my mom bringing home the VHS rental copy of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and
Oh,
I can just remember the moment sitting down to watch it, kind of like not really knowing what it was or something like that, and seeing those Klingon ships pass by the camera, and the camera does that big rotate, and they come and they're heading towards the cloud, and I just remember watching that, going like, "What is this? This is amazing!"
it's such a grand movie. And the moment I remember vaguely as well. The first time watching motion picture, that's definitely an experience for a lifetime in many ways. Like first adventure for the original series crew, and then just the memories that you come up with, that you have fondly.
Yeah, everybody talks about how long the scene is where Kirk's flying around the Enterprise looking at it, and I'm like, can we do 10 more minutes of this? This is beautiful.
Yeah. No. That being said, though, it's good that they didn't do it for the second movie, because they use kind of a similar structure for boarding the Enterprise, but yeah,
hmm
I think that would have been a bit too much.
Definitely.
So, being being a Star Trek fan, and Star Trek being in your life for such a young age, from such a young age, what would you say the show did affect your life, or in terms of the profession that you chose, in any level?
I think it definitely affected me in a number of ways. Star Trek has always been a big influence on my life. So, early on it was, yeah, it was cool. It looked gorgeous, and, that was all neat. But, as I grew older, I kind of absorbed a bit of the messaging in Star Trek, and the hope for a better future and all that sort of thing. And I think it might be partially, I want to say, to blame for me going into teaching and that sort of thing, and picking a profession where people get altruistic and say, oh, I want to make the world a better place than when I came to it, or whatever. I think that definitely had an impact of some kind, wanting to be that positive influence that Star Trek is as well.
Mm. And you did become a teacher. You're a
I
teacher.
did, yeah. Yeah, I taught for a number of years. Not sure if, when the world gets back on track after coronavirus, which we're all living through right now, if I'm going to be going back to that or not, not sure. My career's kind of gone through different, oh, let's try this, let's try this. I was born in 1982, so I'm a millennial, right? We just stick with a job for 3 or 4 years and then move on. That's
Mm.
kind of what we're supposed to do, apparently.
Wow. But within all of these years that you've been a teacher, and then teaching students and pupils, have you ever gone into a class dressed up as a Star Trek personnel?
I have not. Beyond Halloween, when I was in elementary, I think I did that a couple years. But no, I actually have a teacher friend who's currently a principal who has done that and has pictures of him in his classroom with his uniform. And like, I'm still like, that's brave. I would not do that. But that's amazing.
Gosh, I remember back in early in my life, I wanted to become a teacher as well, but life played a bit of a different role with me. I'm not going into too much details because this is not about me. I mean, in a sense it is, but it's not. But I remember when my mom made my very first or second first contact uniform. She's a tailor,
Mm.
and she I was like, I was begging her to do something, so we went to the fabric store together. We we got the right colors and everything, and I showed
Oh,
her so
very
many
cool.
pictures, and she made it, and it was really good. I think I still have it, but unfortunately I can't fit it anymore. And I remember going into school in the uniform, and obviously everyone made fun of me, saying that like what of the joker you are, and then even one of my teachers was like, "Are you sure about this, Gary?" It's like, "Of course." Like if you wear your baseball shirt, or you wear your basketball team shirts, like what is the difference?
Yeah, same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, apart from, being a teacher and being a Star Trek fan, you're an avid model builder. As
Mhm.
far as I know you from your Twitter feed, and we did exchange a little bit of a communication on that too. How many models did you build, and why you enjoy building models of
Oh,
Star
I'm
Trek?
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how many I've built over the years. Quite a few. Lately I haven't been building as much, and I can't even unfortunately say it's because of a lack of time. I've got lots of time on my hands right now, but yeah, for some reason I've kind of not been doing a lot of that lately. But yeah, I love building models. I think I started when I was really young, and of course, mostly because they were Star Trek, right? Oh, here's a Star Trek thing I can get and I can try out. And my first few were obviously disasters because, building a model's pretty tough. And, when you're 10, you think you can do anything. And no, it does not look good. Um, but yeah, over the years, I've come back to it a few times. I even during when I was in university, I actually worked at a hobby store, and of course that helped quite a bit. Bought a bunch of models and learned from people who were a lot better at it than I was. And yeah, I've kind of branched out from not just Star Trek. I've also done other science fiction models, and even for a little period in my life, I kind of got into building World War II airplanes and stuff as well.
Nice.
But now I'm pretty much focused back on Star Trek and Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica. And, they don't make Stargate models that I've found anywhere. They need to do
Yeah,
that.
they need to definitely. I mean, even though I'm not a massive Stargate fan, but it would be awesome to have like a Stargate, the SG-1 version, or even all three of them that
Yeah.
we got to know. That would be awesome, or any of the ships, or the pyramids, or I don't know. There's a lot of. I mean, that's a whole different, um, YouTube channel for for, for Stargate. Do you still remember the first model that you built?
Oh, man. Trying to think back. It was probably. It might have been. I remember I had a three-piece Klingon, Romulan, and original Enterprise
Oh,
model
one of those
kit.
AM tickets, right?
Yeah, that might have been the first or close to the first. Um, but yeah, it was a long time ago. That's one of the first ones I remember trying my hand at, and I don't think the Klingon ship came out very well. The Romulan ship looked pretty good. I can't even remember if the Enterprise was anything close to a good model or not. I probably messed it all up.
But I can imagine that you don't have the model now, just because
No, that
because you
that one.
you thinking about it as a fun memory.
Yeah, that one is long gone.
Oh, bless. So, do you prefer, in terms of modeling, do you prefer, because at this time with Hero Collector or Eagle Moss, you can buy all the ships, with not talking about like nitpicking, or the window
Mhm.
not aligned or anything, but now that a lot of them are available, do you still prefer building them, and why do you prefer building them instead of
Oh,
buying them?
that's a good question. I do have a lot of the Eagle Moss models. I did collect them for a long time until they just got to be too many, and I was like, okay, I got to stop. Um, and they are gorgeous. The thing is, with the Eagle Moss models, everyone's looks exactly the same. There's no kind of personality into it or that kind of thing. I feel like when you build a model kit, there's more of you in there, and it is a lot more work, and sometimes that work may not be worth it. But sometimes you come out with a model that just looks amazing. My favorite one that I did in the last few years is actually the Cylon Raider from the new Battlestar Galactica,
Oh wow.
and that was the first time that I really like weathered a model. So I got in there with like pastels and gave
Wow.
it like some weathering and some dirt and you know I guess bullet hits and that kind of thing and scratched paint, and I love it. I think it looks really good, and no one else's will ever look exactly like that one. And I just think that's kind of a neat thing to have on your shelf.
That absolutely. That I mean, The only thing I had a really my really first model. I think I've got an Enterprise, one of the AMT ones, but like the
Mhm.
really like old ones, and I've got it from from a classmate of mine who used a silver heat-resistant paint in it. Just like he covered the whole thing, and instead of using the decals for the register number, he actually carved it in,
Oh
and
wow.
it looked ridiculous, like the worst thing that you can imagine. And I still have that model. My mother broke it twice. Sorry, mom. She broke it twice, and I still keep putting it back together. Got some donor parts, and even though I have more sophisticated models ever since, and I myself have, I would never get rid of that one model.
Mhm.
I would be like, if if something would happen, I was like, okay, that stays, even though it's nothing to do with anything. It just reminds me of my first model, which is an awesome thing to have.
Yeah, it's got that special meaning to you. Absolutely. Like, if I had a, I don't know, an Eagle Moss model that was, one of the extra large ones or whatever,
Mhm.
that, I'd paid a lot of money for, and it got destroyed or damaged or whatever, I'd feel bad. I'd be like, oh, I spent a lot of money on that. That sucks. But, you know, having something that you made or something like that that means a lot to you, that means a lot more to lose that. So, I think that's kind of the answer right there, how much it's worth to you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's that really says something.
No, it is true, and just as you said, like if you spend the same amount of money that probably 500 other people spend the same amount of money on it, then it's not as special when you
Hmm.
spend countless of hours to put it together the way how you want to have it.
Yeah, again, not to knock it, I have lots
Oh
of
no,
Eagle Moss
absolutely.
models and I love them.
Absolutely. So, we talked a little bit about history in, I know it because, Star Trek, how did you get in? And of course, went into a bit of a modeling as well. I know that you, being in Canada, you're kind of close, sir, to that one location that kind of became a Star Trek pop culture icon in Alberta, that little city
Mm.
called Vulcan. And I know you made a video about it, but I really just wanted to touch on a little bit. How was that going to that kind of made up historical place? And because many people probably seen the movie Trekkies with Dennis Crosby, a fantastic little place. What is it? How was that for you? For you?
It was a great experience. It's kind of funny having lived in Alberta for almost all of my life. I left for a few years, but then came back. I hadn't been to Vulcan until just a couple years ago, which I tell other Star Trek fans that, and they're just amazed. I even lived in Calgary, which is a lot closer to Vulcan than where I'm living now, and I lived in Calgary for a few years, and I just never made it there. And yeah, that trip that I took kind of almost had me kicking myself for not doing that sooner because, of course, I went during the convention that was there, Vulcan, and there's just so many great people that embrace that and just have so much fun with it. Local businesses that, you know, deck themselves out in Star Trek paraphernalia. And there's, like a bust of Leonard Nimoy there that he has visited and signed, and these murals on the sides of buildings. Like there's one that features just all the doctors from Star Trek for some reason. It's so
Is
great.
it like a GP practice? It's a medical facility, or
That's what I was trying to figure out. I was wondering if it was a doctor's office. We were there when it was closed, and I didn't go around to the front side to see what was on the front of the buildings. But yeah, there's just so much neat stuff there, and of course the big roadside model of the Enterprise that they've got there and all that stuff. But for me, like all of that stuff was neat. But for me, the biggest thing was the people and just meeting them and their stories and, what Star Trek means to them and what it has meant to that town. There's always the story that they wanted to have a premiere of Star Trek 2009 in Vulcan,
Mhm.
and Paramount Studios was like, "Oh yeah, let's do that." Oh wait, there's no theater there big enough for that.
Bless.
So I think what they ended up doing was like busing a bunch of the residents to
Oh,
Calgary to for a premiere or something
oh,
like that. But
Yeah.
I love stuff like that. It's just it's in so many ways a stereotypical small Alberta town, but at the same time it has this whole Star Trek element that is just bizarre and wonderful.
Is it a place that you would like to go back in the future?
Absolutely, yeah. I would love to make it kind of a regular thing to attend the convention there. I think it would be a lot of
Oh, yeah,
fun.
they do it every year as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've
You've
still
been
only
in
been the one time, unfortunately.
Oh, and but you've been in so many conventions. I mean, you've been in Las Vegas as well, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I've been there a few times over the years. Yeah.
Hmm. All right. Well, just in talking about Vulcan, have you been in the other all the other historical Star Trek places like Vasquez Rocks or the Van Nuys Water Reclamation Park in Los Angeles or all the other places?
Yeah, I actually have not made it there. The closest I've done was a few years ago. I think it was 2009. Oh, man, a few years ago. That's 11 years ago now.
Yeah.
Crazy. But some friends and I took a road trip down the west coast, all the way down from where we are in Canada, down the Oregon coast and
Mhm.
California. And for me, driving across the Golden Gate Bridge was just such an amazing thing. Star Trek, there's so much set in San Francisco, so
Yeah.
driving across that bridge, I'm thinking of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. I'm thinking of like all the establishing shots of Starfleet Academy and all that stuff. But beyond that, no, I've never really made it to any of those other landmarks. I have a friend who, kind of a friend of a friend, started the whole. You might have heard of Geek Nation tours. They do a bunch of tours
Maybe.
of
Is
places
that
like
one
that.
with Larry Nemeczek or?
Yeah, they've partnered with Larry over the years and stuff too. Yeah, and so they do tours of like the Vasquez Rocks and all of those places as well. And yeah, I've always kind of wanted to get involved with them and do stuff like that, but the opportunity has not presented itself yet.
But once this whole situation blows out of the air, hopefully, I
Hmm.
yeah, look forward to see that video on your channel.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
And talking about your channel, Positively Trek, the podcast, how did that came by as an
Well, that
idea?
yeah, that came by mostly myself and Bruce Gibson, who's my co-host. For a few years, we've done literary treks on the Trek FM network, where we talk about Star Trek books and comics. And I love that. I've always loved that aspect of Star Trek. However, a lot of times when we're recording the show, we kind of have discussions before and after we turn off the microphones
Mhm.
about everything else in Star Trek. And we're like, we want to talk about all the rest of Star Trek. Like, we're kind of not pigeonholed, I guess, but we're kind of narrowed focused when we're
Mhm.
just talking about the books and stuff. We kind of wanted to expand that and talk about more to do with Star Trek, all the aspects of Star Trek. And a trend we've been seeing lately is this kind of strange negativity when it comes to Star Trek. And I'm not just talking about criticism or legitimate complaints about television shows and films, because that's fine. People can have legitimate complaints and
Of course.
legitimately not like things about Star Trek, but when it's done in such a nasty manner. So, for example, people on Twitter who will tag the cast and crew of Star Trek Discovery and tell them that, they're doing such a horrible job, and, this is not real Star Trek, and Gene Roddenberry would hate them and stuff. Like, that's just nasty. You don't do
It
that.
is.
So yeah, we kind of wanted to bring like a positive talk of Star Trek, not falsely positive, not like just being positive for the sake of being positive. We legitimately sometimes have some criticisms and that kind of thing, but we want to engage in a positive manner and talk about things in a fun way, and instead of a slagging people off way, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
No, absolutely, and I think you guys do a fantastic job, and yeah, it's just really good to have this. and many other podcasts as well, among yours, of course. Um, to have them up there and then just listen to it and just have a laugh for that 1 hour or something. It's always amazing. And yeah, no, you doing both of you are doing great. And I do have to touch on something else that I think it's another kind of podcast that you kind of started doing, the Unready Room on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so is this like a second podcast? Because you have some amazing guests in there as well. I mean, there's not guests, like there's an established crew in there as well.
Hmm. Yeah, that kind of started. So yeah, it was kind of it's a live show that we do on Fridays, and originally it was just kind of during the period of time that Star Trek Picard was on the air. We wanted to do like kind of just a live show discussion of the most recent episode, that kind of thing. Uh, During the run of Star Trek Picard, of course, this whole coronavirus hit and everyone's kind of stuck in their homes, and some of us, don't have jobs that we're going to every day right now, and all that kind of stuff is happening. So we thought, like, let's keep this up while this is going on. We've got nobody's going out on Friday nights to bars or restaurants or partying, so why not stay in and watch some nerds talk about Star Trek. So yeah, we've been just basically polling the commenters to pick an episode, and we get a few suggestions and put a poll out on Twitter, and the next week we end up talking about that episode. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's just kind of something that we're doing just basically for fun, and we'll see how long it goes after after this all blows over, like you say. Hopefully that happens sometime soon. But I wouldn't mind keeping up with this. Maybe not on Friday nights in the future, but it's a lot of fun. I love doing that live show. I've always been kind of, not afraid, but a little bit nervous about doing live show stuff, because if you watch my channel, it's heavily edited, right? Like I'll be talking and I'll mess up a line 20 times, and I'll edit it till I get it absolutely right. I can't
Yeah,
do
I
that
know,
when it's
being there.
live. It's a little scary.
It is. I think that's one of the reasons I never did that in my 4 years producing videos. Like, no freaking way. I got better at it, but we both know like how much time and effort goes into one video. And yeah, but yours are fantastic. I mean, I remember there was one point when you did weekly Star Trek news, and I think at one point it went on to a monthly one, because I guess that weekly was around the time when Discovery started happening in production, and a lot of news and guest announcement, these sort of things, and really structured and really good one. But um, where did I want to go with this? No. So yeah, no, those are always so amazing, and very good to just to get an overall summary, like what happened in Star Trek. And I really enjoyed watching those. And I hope once everything comes back to normal, you will make them as well, because I think they're really informative and entertaining as well.
Oh,
And
thanks a lot. That I
but
appreciate that.
no, it's true. I mean, I'm not trying to put everyone into the biggest pedestal, and I'm just being honest. Um, but would you say you're more, because obviously you do a fair amount of videos, would you say you're more like a broadcaster, podcaster, or a video content creator?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm kind of straddling two different worlds a little bit most of the time. I my YouTube channel, I think I've struggled a little bit trying to figure out what I want to do with it exactly. So, like you said, for a while I did kind of do the weekly news thing. I've also had this series, and I put series in quote marks because it's been laying fallow for a long time, which is the Trek lore series, where I talk about like a person, place, or idea in Star Trek, and I haven't gotten back to that in ages. And I look at some channels like TREKKERPRISE is one, for example, who does these amazing video essays about Star Trek, and I'm like, wow, if I could get to that level of polish on videos, that would be amazing. Steve Shives is another one with his ongoing Trek Actually series is something that I'm like, that's a lot of fun. Like that idea is really cool. I like that idea of doing video essay type stuff. I've been finding my productivity lately has not been that great. Again, I don't know what the excuse is. I seem to have lots of time on my hands, but yeah, no, I definitely want to put more time and energy into the channel and kind of, you know, I think if you look at the videos over the course of the few years I've been doing it, it does feel like I get on kind of a trajectory of doing one thing for a while and then I kind of do another thing for a while. And
I
so
could not help noticing that you did, I think, 2 episodes of the Orville season 2, and then you stopped. You're like, no, I'm not doing this.
yeah, that was one that like I enjoyed the Orville, but I just wasn't enjoying it at the same level that I was like, gosh, I really want to sit down and make a video about this every week, you know? So
I understand.
um I'm still, it's funny, the Orville, I have season one on DVD upstairs and I've watched up to the season finale and I still haven't watched the season finale or
Really?
season two yet. Yeah, so
Wow. I mean,
I got to get back
that's
to
been a
that.
long time ago. Season 3 is almost here. Well, it's not almost, but at some point.
Yeah.
Well, you are a big Star Trek book lover guy. Because as you mentioned, you did literally Trek podcast, and then of course on your channel you had most of Trek lit, quite a few books that you read, and I think the last video they did an update video recently, and you said that there's 1 or 2 books that you really want to check out and review and just give your overall opinion. How many books did you read, and the most important question that obviously after this, does it matter in terms of story and everything that does it makes it less enjoyable that that in theory, and I hate to do this, but
Mhm.
not part of the real canon?
Yeah.
Does it make it less valuable?
Those are some good questions. As far as the number of books I've read, I have no idea. Um, I can tell you how many books I've reviewed on my website, treklit.com. That's kind of where I started keeping track. Before that, I'd read a ton. And the reason I started that actually was because I'd pick up a Star Trek novel and I'd be like, did I read this one? I don't remember. What's this about? And I'd get halfway through it and I'd be like, oh yeah, I did read this one. I remember kind of what's going on. So that whole thing started as just a way for me to keep track so I could refer to these reviews and say, oh, that's what I thought about that one. And, I guess other people liked reading them too. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, as far as whether or not they're canon, that's kind of something that just going into Star Trek novels, you kind of have to make peace with. For me, I know that none of these stories are canon, and don't let anyone tell you differently. No Star Trek novel is canon, even when they say like, "Oh, it's canon until it's not." Well, that means it's not canon because the TV show or the movie can come along and just wipe it out at any time, and you just
Right.
kind of have to make your peace with that a little bit. I have great novels that I've read over the years that have been completely wiped out. So, an early original series novel, The Final Reflection by John M. Ford, which is all about the Klingons. Now, the Klingons, as they've been shown in TNG and onwards, have just completely wiped that from canon. Like, it just does not, that story doesn't work. It's still a great story. It's still on my shelf, and I'll probably someday pick it up and read it again someday. It's not necessary for it to fit perfectly within canon for it to be a very good story. I'd say the novel Federation is another one. First Contact came out like I think 2 years or a year after that book came out and immediately made it not fitting in
Wow.
continuity, but it's still a great novel. So yeah, I can understand how maybe they might have less relevance to some people, and I totally get that. But at the same time, it's just as a long-time Star Trek novel reader, it's something I've just had to kind of make my peace with.
But it does enriches the connection to the franchise itself, to the not to the Star Trek universe itself, I suppose.
Hmm.
I mean, I have read, I think, I haven't read a full book. I'm so sad to admit. I have I think 2 or 3 books on my shelf. I have not read any of them fully, which I feel so bad about. I even picked up not this month but last month the Voyager book. You know, the Full Circle.
Oh
Which
yeah,
I want.
very good novel.
I started. I mean, you see, This is where I'm kind of at, like not far off. I'm still have like 400 pages to go through, but it started out as a really good book, and because of what happens in the beginning, I'm still like kind of interested. Like, hey, how is that gonna be working out, or what's happened with that character, or like why those things happening in there, which in some cases it's I think it's truly amazing. But this is something that I definitely have to get into.
It's a good one to start with. It's an excellent novel, and Kirsten Beyer is an incredible writer. So you've made a good choice there to start with.
Yeah, I have tried with many other ones as well. I think I have a DS9 one that I got as a present. The Endless or the something Sacrifice. It's a DS9 one.
Hmm. Okay.
I know Ruggle is the main character. You
Hmm.
probably know the title. The Endless Sacrifice,
Oh, the Never-Ending
the
Sacrifice. Yeah.
Never-Ending Sacrifice. There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's actually a really good one as well. Una McCormick is one of my favorite authors as well.
Okay, I'll definitely have to pick these up. I really tried hard to get through this Full Circle book by by the end of last month for the Trek Book Club. I just sorry, Rob, if you're listening to this. I tried, but I failed.
It's
So
all good, you know. There's no like grading system for being a Star Trek fan. You know, you like what you like, and read the
yeah,
books if you
exactly.
want, and there's no timer on it. So,
So if you would have to like let's say recommend one for anyone who never read a book, what would you recommend?
ooh, that's a tough one. That's the kind of thing where I would start to poll them and like ask like what are you into, which series do you like, that kind of thing. If you're looking for like just a solid good Star Trek novel, like original series, I'd say Spock's World by Diane Duane is a really interesting novel. uh, you know it kind of explores the history of Vulcan, and as well as like a crisis that's happening on Vulcan in like the modern times, and by modern I mean Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are there kind of thing. And there's some really great Spock McCoy interactions, which that's one of my favorite things from Star Trek. So
Well, now
that's a
that
good
you
one.
mentioned that there's a crisis in Vulcan, I kind of started thinking like, what the hell are they arguing about? Like, what can be the big crisis? But I guess I have to read the book to find out.
Indeed.
So, I know we talked about quite a lot in terms of relation to Star Trek, but I'm really curious, and I asked this from all of my guests, so probably you know what I'm going to ask. When you think about Star Trek, someone from the very far, just you doing your random things in a day, and then someone from very first shouts Star Trek. What is the first thing that comes to your mind?
That's a really good question. I think for me, Star Trek, what immediately comes to mind is kind of what I was talking about earlier, that hope for the future, that optimism that, we as a species are going to get through this and come together. And, not that it'll just all happen one day, it'll take a whole lot of work, but it's something to strive towards. And the other thing that I always think of when it comes to Star Trek is a group of people working together to make the world better. And they're competent, they're compassionate, they're very good at their jobs. They trust science, they trust rationality, they trust, you know, examining the problem, and instead of reacting emotionally to it, they instead do things that will make a positive difference, if that makes sense. A little bit rambly answer maybe, but those are the kind of things that come to my mind when I think of Star Trek.
So everything basically that we don't have in a sense, without being mean,
Oh,
because when you said like and I totally agree with you. I mean, it's interesting that um, when you think about it, it's not necessarily just a ship or just a character like Kirk or Spock or Picard or the Enterprise or the station, but having this notion of the show itself, and it's kind of what's missing from real life, which is yeah, which would be awesome to have. So
yeah.
I guess the main question, and that's basically the whole podcast about, what is that thing that if you wrap yourself around as a warm blanket, just like you do at the moment because of the cold in the basement. If that blanket is Star Trek, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think, and I love the name of the podcast and I love the concept because that is what Star Trek is to me. Like, Star Trek has been a comfort to me in times when things are rough and that sort of thing. And I think it's, you know, it's everything I mentioned before, but also the relationships between these people. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to put this exactly in words, but like I can watch an episode of Deep Space Nine and I see like Bashir and O'Brien sit down at Quark's bar and share a drink together and play darts or something. And I'm just like, you know, they're 400, 300 years in the future, whatever, but they're people, you know? They're people just like us. And that to me is comforting that, I know it's fiction, but
Mhm.
when you watch Star Trek, you can imagine we'll be around in that time and we'll be confronting things that we never thought imaginable, but we'll be doing it with our friends by our side and people that we can count on. And I just something about that just makes me really happy. There's so much on television, and I don't mean to knock other stuff on television, but there's so much on TV where the drama is comes from a place of, oh, our coworkers, we have to have an argument every 2 minutes and yell about what we're going to do and blah blah blah. But you rarely get that on Star Trek. There's disagreements, there's that sort of thing, but at the end they always all come together for a solution. And especially if you watch TNG, I mean, that was a thing Roddenberry said, like, they never argue, they don't have these interpersonal arguments that and maybe from a writer's perspective that makes it harder to write and that sort of thing, but it created this ideal of just competent people working together and these strong relationships that just really comforts me for sure.
That's beautiful. Well then, thank you very much. It was really awesome to sit down and talk about yourself and the love of Star Trek, and just get this warm blanket feeling that you're probably feeling more than I do at the moment, based on your apparel.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. This is, I think, a wonderful idea for a podcast, and it's been a lot of fun talking about it and sharing this stuff. So I love that, you're making this forum for people to share what this thing that's so important to all of us means to us. So it's been
Yeah.
great.
No, I did, and thank you again for joining. And I hope I will welcome you back in future episodes.
Oh,
We
for
dive
sure.
into a bit more into different aspects of the show with a segment that I have not revealed yet for many people, but will do. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining, and for all of you ad listeners. If you want to connect with Dan, so help me out in here, where everyone can find you aside your YouTube channel and
For
Twitter.
sure. Yeah, so yeah, Twitter at Kertrats, Positively Trek, like you said, is our new podcast. You can find that on Twitter as well, at Positively Trek. Our Star Trek literary podcast, Literary Treks, on the Trek FM network. And those two podcasts you can find wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, man, I'm doing too much stuff. I got a bunch of stuff out there. So
You're a busy man.
yeah, just search Kertrats. You'll find a bunch of stuff.
All right. Well, thank you again for being here. Thank you again for listeners to listening to another episode of Warm Blanket. Live long and prosper. And that was it for this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and rest assured, new episode will be coming out every week where we sit down with a Trekkie to find out what makes us feel good about Star Trek and to discover what is our warm blanket made of. If you really enjoyed listening to this podcast, please leave a review on your favorite podcasting app. It would really mean a lot to me. I also would like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters, as they really make a big difference on the creation of this podcast. To find out more about how you can support this audio adventure, please visit TREKKERPRISE.com/podcast, where you can also listen to the previous episodes. Thank you again for listening to yet another episode of the Warm Blanket podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode. Live long and prosper.